and now we had a chance to do one where I was directing and producing, collaborating together. So I asked him to join me for this, and just to talk through some principles, some basic things we've learned. And we'll take a little bit of time on the front end to give you some highlights. And then I'd love to take an extended amount of time to discuss with you guys your projects and any specific questions you have. So that's what I'd like to do with our time. We'll spend a little bit discussing some principles and ideas, and then we'll dive into your guys' questions and hopefully provide some good valuable information for you. So real quick, just as a special treat, I want to play what we call the heart of. It's a rough cut of the heart of for the project that David and I just finished together. So this has never before been seen other than like 5 people who actually worked on editing it. So if you don't like it, keep it to yourself. If you do like it, then tell other people this movie will be coming out sometime soon. But this is a movie we shot in the Rocky Mountains last winter. It was very cold and very challenging in a lot of different ways. So this is the heart of. It tells us our vision and purpose behind the film, why we wanted to make it. So if we could go ahead and play this, it's just a couple minutes long, and then we'll jump into the material. All right, so that's the project that we shot out in the mountains. As you can see, it's very cold and snowy, and there's a lot of challenges that come when you try to bite off a project like that. So something that, as I was thinking, from wearing the producer hat and then the director hat going back and forth, the most helpful thing that you can have is clarity of what your goals are. So I know we can't have everything. Like in the script, you saw there's that little red 4-wheeler that was driving around. In the original script, I wanted it to be a snowmobile. But we found the region of Colorado we were shooting, the time of year we were shooting, you weren't guaranteed to have blankets of snow. So if we pushed later, you were guaranteed to have like 3 feet of snow. And it's like, well, that's going to be tougher on our crew. So what do? So we went back into the script and we said, can we change it from a snowmobile to a 4-wheeler? Well, in the script, the snowmobile is going to skip across an open river, which I don't know if you've ever seen snowmobiles doing that. It's, you can actually drive across water if you're going fast enough, and it was this big, expensive, complex thing. But for the sake of the story, it didn't really matter. We just need to get them onto some kind of a vehicle so they can get away from the wolves and so it can crash so they can have this heartfelt scene afterwards. So those are the conversations that David and I would start to have as we were looking at the locations that are available, we were looking at what we had in our budget and what was available to us. So when we set off to make this movie, we identified 3 things that the movie had to have in order to be a success in our mind. And I cheated and added a 4th, because you really should have 3 things for everything. It just makes it easier to remember. But then I cheated and added a 4th. So I said the movie needs to capture the beauty of the Rocky Mountains and of the great outdoors. So a lot of times as we're going to select locations, you're like, guys, this is great, it's great lunch access. There's restrooms right there. There's cast holding. I mean, there's heat and air conditioning. It's fantastic. Yeah, but it's in Albany, Georgia. There aren't any mountains there. So how are you going to shoot your movie if you shoot it right here? So I say, okay. So you have to keep pushing until you find the location that we can actually capture the Rocky Mountains. So that was goal 1. Goal 2 was to capture heartfelt performances around the theme of fatherhood in these particular scenes. So I had like 6 scenes that I said, as a director, I need time with my cast. I need comfort for my cast to be able to get them to the place that they can give me these performances. And then the third thing we said is we need to have adventure. We can cut a lot of things, but we can't cut all of the adventures. If they're just wandering through a parking lot somewhere, it's not going to be the movie that it needs to be. So we had those 3 on-screen goals. And then our 4th goal, as I said, as a team, we want to set up a production that allows us to climb the mountain together as friends and all come back down the mountain together safely as friends. And that was our 4th goal that we added. So David, talk to us, as I came to you with kind of these ideas and these goals for the movie, and then like the 25-cent budget that we had to do it. How do we start into those conversations of figuring out where to shoot and the pros and cons and all those choices?
Well, it's very important to have your priorities in place. You have to kind of know what's most important, because that's going to allow you to make decisions when you have impossible decisions to make. One of the big drivers definitely was that we wanted to go up the mountain and come back down as friends, and not just us, but the whole crew. We also wanted to make sure that people's families weren't being lost in the mix. And so that was definitely, I mean, the driving factor to kind of everything we did. It was like, okay, does this work? It's like, we know what we need to do story-wise, all these different pieces. And it impacts everything. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that was definitely at the forefront of just how we were approaching things. We wanted to treat people in a way that we'd be able to minister to the crew as well, not just make a movie. But we firmly believe, both of us and many others here, the way you treat your crew, the experience that everyone's having on set will find its way onto the screen as well. It will improve the quality of your production if there's a good atmosphere and a good experience on set.
So a few more thoughts along those lines. So thoughts coming from producing into directing. Thoughts for you guys. As a director, know your goals. You can't have everything, but you can usually have your priorities. So if you walk into the production office, you walk into your meeting with your producing team, your locations managers, your guys, and you say, guys, this is what I have to have. I want this, I want this, I want that, and you lay out everything you want, and you're inflexible on all of those things. Resources are always limited. It doesn't matter. I mean, I remember being a kid and making a movie for $150, and it's like, guys, you know, we're tight, man. It's tight. Everything's tight, right? And then, you know, then you have a couple $100,000, and it's still just as tight. And then you get $1 million, and it's even tighter. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're making a $150 million movie, and you're like, guys, oh, it's tight. Yeah, so that's the way everybody feels all the time. So resources are always limited. So as you're shaping your story and as you're leading your team, if you can come into your production office, come to your producers, and approach it with a mindset of these are the things that are important, and then these are the things that we can be flexible on. Those are the pieces that you're looking for. And look at the people on your team as team members and not as antagonists. So this happens often with people look to defend their department first. They say, well, my department needs this. Well, my department needs that. Well, this isn't going to work for this reason. And whenever you come up with an idea as a producer, it seems like you throw it out to your team, and everybody has 100 reasons why it's a bad idea. And you say, well, guys, it's the only idea I've got. What are we going to do now? But as you have those relationships and as you start to talk to your team about it, listen to your team and be as flexible as you can on the things that you can be flexible on. But if there's something that you have to tell the story, know that going in. Don't hold and clutch onto every single idea and every single piece. Pick the ones that are most important, and then empower your team. Say, well, this is what I need. Why don't you guys go solve the problem? Come back to me with things that'll work from your guys, from the budget side, from the logistics side, and then let them come back and bring those ideas to you. And if you have great clarity on what your core idea is, the core thing you need in any particular environment, that'll set your team up for success to be able to serve the project. Another thought, know your whys and why you need or want something. So I've found from the producer perspective, especially working with cast, from the producer perspective, he said, well, the reason that we're here is because it's impossible for our team to film up there, so we're down here. But then that works great for producer. I tell my locations team, I tell my office, we're shooting here. But then when you start working with your actors and your director of photography and the other creatives, they say, well, I don't feel like my character would do that. Well, the reason that your character would do that is because we can't afford to do the thing your character would actually do. So I'm sorry, that's what your character's doing. That doesn't play very well with your cast or with your finished product. So you do have to switch your brain from thinking specifically about the logistics to thinking about those characters. And I found that trusting your cast and inviting them into that process with you sometimes can be helpful. So, in as much as you can, including them in the blocking for the scene. Say, look, this is where we're at. The camera has to stay on this side. You're coming in that door. I need you to get from here to there. How do you think your character would handle these things? And have that conversation with them rather than saying, this is what it has to be, and making up some dumb reason why their character would do that. They're just going to get frustrated very quickly. So as you take your logistics brain and apply it back and forth, make sure you include people in those conversations and help them build those whys with you. David, let's talk about, you mentioned briefly this different stakeholders who are involved. So as we're planning to do a project like this, who are the stakeholders that you have in mind?
Well, while I'm thinking about that, I will mention the reason you never have enough budget is because there's always an expectation that goes along with the funds that you have. And usually the expectation is that hopefully you will exceed the expectations that you would usually have for that budget. So it's like, hey, you have $1 million, let's make it look like $3 million or $5 million. You have 200,000, let's make it look like $1 million. It's just, that's why you never have enough money. There's a different expectation if you have $150 than if you have 1.5 million, hopefully. If not, you're going to be very disappointed. So different stakeholders, you have the viewer, first and foremost, that's going to see your film, right? They're the person that, they're watching it, they don't really care how hard it was or wasn't to get any particular shot or how long you worked on it, right? They're just watching a story. So ultimately, when you're making a project, that's one of the stakeholders that you have to think about. It's like, what about the viewer? How are they going to experience this? You also have the people that are enabling you to be able to make the project. You have the people that are funding it or helping you on that side of things. You have the whole crew, all the people that are working to make this vision come to life. I feel like I'm forgetting one. What am I forgetting?
Your environment, the location, the community.
Oh, right, yeah. And then you want to be able to go back where you were filming and film again, even if you don't need pickups. So basically, when you're producing, when you're working on a project, you're looking at these different variables, and they all kind of have to work together in harmony to some degree. Because if you throw any of them out, it throws everything out of balance, and you need all of these variables to work together to be able to accomplish what you're trying to do.
So, for example, if we said, guys, this is going to be a super crew-friendly movie. We're going to shoot like an hour and a half a day, and then we're just going to hang. You know, we're going to have, the catering is going to be out of control, not hotels, guys, or resorts. Like, this is the movie. Well, guess who's going to suffer? Your investors or, you know, studios and your audience, right? And the reason everyone is there working is because they want to help you tell that story. But if you consistently say, you know, forget the crew, we're going 90 minutes, we're going into OT again, pretty soon your crew's you're gonna lose the trust of your crew and you're gonna be taking advantage of them. But finding the balance of those and even knowing when to prioritize which one is a lot of conversations between the director and the producer. Because sometimes going into 90 minutes of overtime is exactly the right choice to make. Sometimes going up and shooting in freezing cold temperatures is the right choice to make. Sometimes it's not. And how do you know which one to push at which time? Careful thinking and planning and praying through those. But you always have all of those groups in the front of your mind. Your crew, and I'd like to add on to the crew is your crew's families as well. Because if you beat them up and they leave your set totally exhausted and wiped out, when they go back to their home, their family is absorbing the extra that you wrung out of them. So making sure that you invest in your crew while they're there and that they can go home and then take care of their families, that's a piece of that. And then again, your location, the place that you're filming, and your audience and your investors. So keeping all of those groups in mind is critical. So I want to open up for questions in just a second. Any questions you guys have about producing, directing, the collaboration on those, or even specifics for your project. I also just want to say, as you're thinking and collaborating creatively between these two things, there are so many different kinds of creativity that you have to draw on. It's not that producing is a logistics-oriented project and directing is a creative-oriented project. Both of them are very logistics and very creative. I'm going to talk about budgeting just for a minute as a lens through which to view your project. So with a budget, there's many different ways to approach it, but one is you say, okay, how much money you have, you slice it up across all of your needs, and then you go for it. And we're often asked, we're working on a project now, that the potential financier says, okay, give me a budget. And it's like, well, we don't have a script yet. You approved like a log line, like a concept. It's like, yeah, give me a budget. Like, well, what should the budget be? I don't know, $2 million. It's like, okay, well, we could show you how we would spend $2 million in a theoretical world, but all the details aren't yet in place. But that's how a lot of projects happen, that you have to, like, you approve the amount of money you have and before you even have the whole script written, and that can be challenging. But how do you do a budget? How do you approach that? I like to view a budget as a creative tool to help us determine our priorities. So you can weight your budget towards number of shooting days is a huge driver of your budget. Is this a movie you can shoot out in 10 days? Well, Legacy Peak was 20, and I really, over and over again, found myself wishing I had like 25 days. Now again, everybody wishes they had more time. But it was very tight. We had a lot of one takes where it's you get it and you have to move on right then. Or we had a lot of times where we just cut whole setups because we had to just get the scene done as fast as we can because the sun was setting because we're filming in the mountains in the winter. Who knew that the sun barely doesn't rise till like 9 a.m. and sets at like 3? It's like, I should have taught me that when I was in high school, but they probably did. But we were very, very tight on time. So what does that mean and how does that impact you? So you can weight your schedule towards more setups, more shooting days, more time, or you can put your budget on bigger casts. You get bigger name actors and you pay them more, or more gear and equipment. So if you have more lights, so some of that night scene that you saw, we rented a big generator and 2 big 18Ks that are flooding the whole background. So on those days, it allowed us to shoot more quickly because we didn't have to relight the background every time with tiny lights. We had it all lit with big lights, and then we can just move around and shoot. So thinking through the budget from a creative perspective. What are your goals? Where do you need it? Where don't you? A creative choice we made was to have them have a torch. And one of my goals is to get a torch in every movie I make because they're so beautiful. And my DP had never shot with a torch before. I'm like, bro, you are in for a treat. So we were able to save a bunch of money by having leaning on special effects to get us a torch. And that's light right here in our foreground. And then again, it avoids little things. So as you're thinking about your budget, have your list of priorities and weighing all those different pros and cons, and thinking of a budget as a creative tool to help shape your team. So one thing that we went into it saying we have very limited wardrobe because the people are going to crash in a plane, they're all going to have one costume. So I said, okay, that's something that we can trim back is the number of different outfits that we have to have. Now we have to have 3 copies of each thing because they get dipped in the drink and they're cleaned and they're dirty. But we didn't have to have a bunch of changes, so that can be helpful. And then again, the variety of locations. We had very limited locations. You can pick the things in your budgeting to allow you to get what you need for that particular project on screen. Anything to add to that, David?
Nothing. I mean, you covered everything. No, it's always challenging finding the balance, right? I think communication's one of the biggest things that you want to really work on consistently. Whether you're working with people you've worked with a lot, or especially if you're working with someone new. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different directors, and one of the first things I learned was that I needed to understand their way of speaking. Because you think, hey, we all speak English, maybe. But guess what? You may not be communicating the same thing with the same words. I have a good friend and director, and he would always, say things like, I'm just going for that classic look. You all know exactly what classic look is, right? I mean, if we all started drawing a picture, it would be the exact same picture, right? It would be that classic look. Well, I had to start asking questions, like, so, can you give me some examples, or what does that look like? It's like just a classic look. Got it. So I was like, so just kind of locked off, medium shot. Yeah. It's like, whew, okay, we're getting somewhere, right? So just learning to really try to hear and understand and make sure that you're on the same page can be very helpful as you're starting to work on everything from the budget, story, all those different pieces of the creative process.
So I'll say one more thing, and then feel free to, guys, raise your hands on any questions you have about your project. I'd love to start getting into those as well. Building trust between you. I actually trust David quite a bit because I've known him for a while, and he's proved himself like many times. So when he says something, like, I think it's going to take 7.5 minutes for you guys to get out of this room when we're done. I'd be like, it'd probably be 7 minutes and 15. He probably put like 15 seconds of padding, right? And I can, like, I know, like, exact. Now, some people, they'll say, like, 20 minutes. Or my wife will always round up because she knows our family pretty well, and she's estimating all these things ahead. So she says, guys, it's already almost 10 o'clock. And I look, and it's actually 9:14. She says, yes, but I'm factoring in by the time you get the kids' teeth brushed, you tell their story, we do all these things, it will be 10 o'clock. And so learning to trust and have those paths of communication is important. But early on, recognizing the value of building trust, it's huge, because then when we get to moments, I say, David, can I have another hour today? And if he says no, then I know he's not fudging, he's not cheating, he's not doing it for some other reason. We honestly can't. Says, okay, then we'll figure out a way around it. Or if I say, but actually I really do need this, then he'll say, okay, then we'll do it. And then he trusts me that when I get back in the office tonight and we burn an extra $15,000 on something he didn't have budget for, we'll look 3 days ahead and we'll cut things out of the budget together to make the best choices. So when you have a very high level of trust, it allows you to extend yourselves and take risks together to put value on the screen and take care of your crew and get the jobs done. So, yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, speaking about trust, I know, ideally we would always love to work with other believers on cast and crew. But could you talk a little bit about ways that when we do have believers in kind of our core group that's influencing us as directors or producers, how can we better leverage that to make Christian films better than what the world does?
That is a great question. I think a huge part of it does go back to trust, which with David and I in this last project, we had one team member come in who is, a guy from LA, really, really good at what he does. But we had forgotten, because our core team was so trusting, we'd forgotten what it takes to earn that trust and get people to buy into what you're doing. And I found that it takes like about a week to kind of get there on average. I remember I had, I'll get back to that story in 1 second. On Beyond the Mask, I had an actor come in from LA who was very not trusting. He'd been burned 1 million times, and he thought this whole project was probably a scam. We were probably trying to take advantage of him, all these things. And he was very, very defensive. And he kept pushing the boundaries. And it was a Screen Actors Guild film, so everybody needed their own dressing space and things like this. And something happened where I sat down with him on this couch in this location we were filming. We were chit-chatting, and then I walked out, and like 90 seconds later, my phone rings from the production office. It's calling me to tell me that they have the agent on the phone from the actor I was just talking with a complaint about his dressing room. And I was like, well, I was just in there. We were having a nice conversation. And it turns out another actor had been in the room with him, and he wanted his own room because he thought that we were violating space. But the other actor was just hanging out. So it's like, no, he has his own room. We're good. Everything's covered. But it was this very, very fear-based, I'm going to call my manager, who's going to call your production office, who's going to call you to complain about something that we could have just taken care of, a simple misunderstanding. So those fear-based decision-making and lack of trust burns up so much efficiency on film sets. But if you know that I love you, that I care about you, that I will listen when you bring an actual complaint and concern, that allows people to extend themselves. And what I mean by that is, when you're on set, if I say, guys, the next thing we're going to shoot is over on this side of the mountain, so go ahead and build all the lights for the night set. So all the guys get up and they're working as hard as they can. They got one guy watching set. The other guys are hoofing cable and stringing things. I say, you know what? Hey, I got a different idea. Let's actually shoot over here. Then all the guys are going to look at me and they'll say, okay, you're the director. And they roll up their cable and they go set up over there. Guess what's going to happen tomorrow? When I say, hey guys, we're going to shoot here, why don't you get set up over there? It's like, not a chance. I'm not going to extend myself. I'm not going to get started. I'm going to get nothing off the truck till I see you've got sticks there and you've got your camera pointed where you shoot, because I don't trust you and you're wasting my time and those kind of things. So if you build that trust and you communicate well and you listen well and you value what they have to say, then your team will be able to extend themselves and go a lot farther and capture a lot more than they would have if everyone is living in their defensive shells.
The other side of trust that I would just bring up, just to tag on to that, is you need to trust the people you're working with. And so in the same way that you're trying to earn their trust and have them work with you, if they say, hey, you know what, I don't think this is viable, or I think we need to adjust this, or I think I'm going to need 4 more people to do this or that, it's important to really trust them on that front. You know, hopefully you brought somebody in that you believe can do that job, so you need to give them the space to be able to do that job. So if I'm hiring somebody to be the gaffer, I'm going to trust them to get the team that they feel will best work for them with the budget that they have to bring on. I'm not going to say, well, hey, you need to hire this person, this person, this person, because that's who I think is best. You know, trust your gaffer. If they need options, they need help, help them, but you need to extend that trust there. That carries on to set, that carries into every area. If that's their area, you want to trust them. And you may need to have conversations as to the different needs that there are and figure out how to work together. But just encourage, you know, like it's a give and a take kind of relationship. So just try to think about those two sides. And of course, just going back to your question as well, I think how we treat each person as an individual or as a leadership position, that trickles down to the whole team. Whether you have a full Christian team, whether you have a hybrid team, Christians and non-Christians, or a mostly secular team, they're all there still to try to bring your vision to life, to try to work with you, and hopefully they're competent at what they're doing. And I think really the difference there is just going to be, how does the light of Christ shine through us, and the way we handle our production, you know, how does that impact them? And again, as we said, I think it does carry through to the screen.
Yes.
In assembling a crew, is there a clear division of responsibility between the producer and director? Like, who should be finding folks for which roles? Because obviously the producer is seeing everything from start to finish, but the director is calling a lot of the practical shots. And I'm first time producing something right now, and thankfully my director, you know, he's earned his wings, he's been through the process before, so I'm leaning a lot on his judgment. But at the same time, I realize that if I'm selecting crew members, he has to be able to work with them. There has to be some sort of rapport that they either have to begin with, or they build up. What do you recommend, like, between those two roles, directing and producing? Are there certain crew roles that are more important that they're chosen by the director or producer? How does that work?
Yes.
Absolutely. No, it's a good question. I would say think about who your director is going to be working with every second of every day, and if they don't get along well, that's going to be trouble. Hopefully, your director is going to be an easygoing person who can kind of adapt and get along with most people. That's not always the case. Who are the people who are most closely interacting with the director? It's going to be the first AD and the director of photography. So you are with those guys, 13 hours a day. Those three are glued together, and then you're cast. So if you say the sound guy, or some of the grip and electric, those are between the director. They're working for the DP. So the whole camera and lighting department is working for the DP. There are other roles that are very creatively important, but are offset to some extent. So wardrobe designer, production designer, you're not rubbing shoulders with them 12 hours a day. Although I've seen projects where the director and the production designer didn't get along, and nobody's happy. So if it's going to be a situation where the director's coming to you and saying, please, can we not work with this person? I'd encourage you to find someone that they can work with. But the ones that I would be most careful to bring a director in conversation is your director of photography and your first AD, and make sure they have great rapport. And I think as you build the spirit of your team, you can really work with anybody, and you can bring someone in. Even if you have one department, it's like, Terry Middleton's our wardrobe designer over here. So, she's like, well, Terry's really, I don't know if she's going to fit in with this team. Well, if the rest of your team is really warm and welcoming, Terry's going to be fine. You'll bring her along. But, of course, Terry is wonderful to work with, and she's the person.
Which is why we can pick on her.
Yeah, that's why we can pick on her. So we say, no, but listen, guys, we have a great team. We've got Terry on our team, so she can lean on and she can help, the hair and makeup department do their thing, because she's going to be there in the morning with the cast, and don't worry, guys, we've got her. So picking people on your team who are who will be team players and will be there for you, and knowing how you can build it, you can deal with a few, I won't say bad apples, but we'll say sour apples, I guess, if you've got good folks in the mix. But yes, to answer your question, I'd say DP and first AD. What'd you add?
Yeah, and just as you think about the producer-director relationship, in many ways the producer has the ultimate responsibility of a project, but you're relying on the director to essentially deliver a lot of what you're responsible for. So as a producer, you're essentially trying to set that director up for success. And when the director is asking you for something, you're trying to figure out if there's a way to get it for them. So generally speaking, the producer is in a serving position to help the director accomplish his goals. So as much as possible, if the director wants to have input on a position, I would say try to find that input. And then if they're like, hey, I don't care, just find me somebody that's good, then at that point, the ball's back, that's back in your workload. So I would say have those conversations, figure out what's most important, see if that's a possibility. A lot of crew decisions comes down to availability and budget. So the director could say, well, I want this gaffer. And you go to that gaffer, it's like, well, he's already working on, Black Panther 3. It's like, well, and we can't get him because he's already booked. So do you have another option? Well, I don't really know anybody else. Let's just see who we can find local. So at that point, you start saying, well, what other crew do I have locally that I trust? Let's see if they know anybody that they've worked with that's good. So there's a lot of finesse and a lot of different angles that you might take on any given position. But if you have that in mind, that you're really trying to set the director up for as much success as possible, I would say figure out who they want to work with, see if that's a possibility. And if they don't have somebody, still get them involved if it's a first AD or director of photography or production designer, anybody that's a key element in helping bring that story to life. As you go further down the ranks, hopefully you're able to rely on those department heads to help secure their crew. So I don't usually try to fill out any crew branch. I'm relying on that person to find who they want or who they need. And then if they can't find it, that's when the producer gets involved again to try to come up with other options.
Can one of you or both of you give an example where there was a specific example? I'm not fishing, just give a specific example so we can learn where there was a major creative difference between the producer and the director and how it was resolved.
You see the scars in the back of David's head? David will work on thinking of an example like that. Well, I will just give a tangent line to that question, which is, as much as you can, building that trust early so that you can avoid getting to those moments of heat, so that you can stand in front of your crew together as one united team is super helpful. So the creative differences that you should have, as much as possible, they should be early when it's just the two of you on the project. And you can work through all those things. Because as on set, 90 seconds is a long time. And if you have to stop and talk to somebody for 90 seconds while 85 people are standing around looking at you, wondering what to do next, hungry watching the sunset, that's not a great time to have your creative differences conversation. So for the most part, those are things that should happen early. So I'm trying to remember a time where I had in the middle of set a big creative difference. But I'll let David tell his while I think of mine.
So just as a general concept, if Aaron comes to me and he says, hey, I want to do this, it's different than what we were planning, or it's going to be a challenge for us, my goal is to say, okay, how can we achieve it? I can't think of a situation specifically where we had a strong difference, because usually Aaron's so good at just adapting to situations. If anything, sometimes I feel like I need to say, Aaron, please fight a little bit more for what you need as a director. Don't throw that out yet. And it's that collaboration. But one of the biggest challenges that we faced when we were filming was actually weather. And we had really good weather most of the time, but we had one day where we started out, there was no snow at all. 2 hours into the day, we had, somewhere between 3 and 8 inches of snow. It was coming down hard. We're up on the side of a mountain. And even as we were starting the day, we saw that there was going to be a challenge there. And so what we did was we actually got, I don't know how many people involved, maybe 8 or 10 people involved. We kind of got all our department heads involved together and said, okay, here's the situation. It could be unsafe to film today. There were supposed to be gusts of 100 miles an hour. There's trees around. The temperatures are supposed to really plummet. There's snow. We're on the side of a mountain filming today. All these variables create a real big question mark, right? Do we call the day off completely? Do we try to start the day? What do we do? And so we had some different opinions about what we should do. And basically, we had a great exercise in trust with our whole core team. But one of the really important things we did was we got everybody involved in the conversation. Kind of like was talked about a little bit yesterday at the producer panel, that whole thing, hearing everybody out, creates buy-in once you make the decision. And so we actually went up on the mountain where we were supposed to be filming, taking our best 4x4 vehicles. We looked at everything. We were talking about, what happens if our production trucks are up here and then we can't get back down because it's too icy. What do we do? We just kind of ran through some different variables. And then we came to a consensus. And again, it doesn't mean that everybody agreed, but everybody said their part, and then we made the best decision we could to move forward. And we ended up filming some great stuff that day. We also ended up calling the day halfway through the day, right? So I think really just trying to communicate well, hear all the sides that are involved, make sure you're making an informed decision can help when you have creative differences. So that would be what I would rely on in that situation. Aaron would explain to me, here's the reasons why we want to do this. I would explain the reasons why I don't want to. And then at some point we have to say, well, this is a creative decision that's going to win and the director's going to go and we'll figure it out. Or this is a production decision or a safety decision and we're going to rule it out even though we think it might work. It's just not safe enough. We're not comfortable with it. Those kind of things.
All right, I thought of real quick of one specific example, and this is a helpful tool for you guys as you're getting started off. On Beyond the Masters, a movie I did a while back, I was producing that and my cousin Chad was directing it. And we got into post-production, and to finish the visual effects that we needed was going to be way more than we had in our budget. I had one of our acting coaches, this guy named John Kirby, he watched like this little sizzle trail we did, and he said, "Now, everything looks so good. I'm just curious about all that green everywhere I'm seeing. Are you guys going to do something about that? I think there's churches that might donate money to you." And it's like, "No, John, we're working on it. Believe me, we're still working on it on these green screens." But it was something where I was concerned about our budget and how much we'd spent, and concerned about, talking to our investors about going over budget and getting more money versus, guys, let's just cut the shots. Let's figure out a way to do it. And we had a disagreement about it for a number of weeks as we were going through post-production. And there's something that we had put in place early on in the project, which wound up being a huge blessing, which is for our production, we set up a board of advisors. So we had, it was my dad, my cousin's dad, my pastor, a businessman from my church, and it was only one filmmaker on the panel, but it was these 5 or 6 guys who we had chosen to say, would you speak into our lives? Would you look over our shoulders as we're going on the journey of this project? And they'd agreed to, and we'd present to them challenging questions along the way. And this is one of them where we were talking together, like we couldn't decide. I could see the pros of his side, he could see the pros of my side. How do you make a decision? Well, we were so thankful that we'd set up this board of advisors to go to and present it and say, hey, here's our thoughts. And when the guys looked at it, they said, hey, let's go back to the investors and see if we could raise more money to finish this. And in hindsight, I'm so glad that they went with my decision, or they didn't go with my decision, and they went with the other opinion, because I think it was exactly the right thing to do. And I couldn't see it from my sandbox, because I had what I thought was my job is to protect the budget. But in that circumstance, having outside voices to speak in is great. So as I've continued on my filmmaking journey, I don't have a formal board of advisors for project to project, but I do have 3 men in my life who I will take challenging questions to, and they know that I have chosen to submit myself to their authority, and I'll give full life updates to them. This is what I'm doing. This is what's happening with my finances. This is what's happening with my family. This is how I'm spending my time. Do you have any input or thoughts or advice for my life? And that is so helpful for me, because they'll say things like, you shouldn't do that. But you weren't in the trenches with me. I know. That's why I can tell you, you shouldn't be doing that. And putting yourself in a position where you humble yourself and ask for that help and listen to it and be honest and open can help. So if it's early on in your career and you're pulling a few people together to do a project, I would say, hey, set up a board of advisors who can help you with that. And as you continue to mature, seek out godly men and women who can mentor you and that you can help yourself and get their advice.
So I had a curious question. I know trust takes a long time to build, seconds to destroy. Just a curious question. How long did it take for you to build, your core team of people you lean on and that you can trust, people that you come back to for like a different project? Like, how long did that take you to build that core team of people you absolutely trust?
Well, I'm still doing it, for sure. We're still, constantly meeting new people and incorporating them in, because as David pointed out earlier, not everybody gets to work on every project. And so it's, hey, when I'm in Georgia, I might get to work with this team. When I'm over here, I might get to work with this team, just depending on the variables or the budgets or even other people. Sometimes what's happened to me over and over again is my favorite people get way too busy, and now they're like, well, I'm sorry, I'm $2,000 a second. My rates have gone up, and I'm directing the next Marvel movie. So, so it's like, well, but it does take a while, but you can build trust quickly through other relationships. So I could ask David, hey, who have you worked with in the past that you would trust? And then you can bridge some of that over and build that by expanding your network in that way. But then also, you can build trust quickly in relationships by listening well, asking good questions, and having your own stuff prepared and put together. And if in the first 10 minutes, if it's like, wow, that girl's put together. She knows what's going on. She did her homework. She showed up. She has a smile on her face and a good attitude. And she came recommended by someone I trust. You can hit the ground running. So on our last project, our second AD, I'd never worked with her before. But David had. I was like, well, I would like to get somebody that I know maybe. And David's like, no, just trust me. We're going with her. I said, okay, I'll trust you. And then she showed up, and she was great. And in like 10 minutes, I was like, okay, she's got it, no problem. And I go with her all of my problems, and she second AD'd for me perfectly. And that's something where we almost immediately built a trusting relationship because she came in prepared, I came in prepared. We both came in well recommended. We were able to use that to make it happen. So, I don't know. Does that help? Awesome.
Well, you kind of answered a little bit of my question. So while you were filming in the Rockies, did you reach out to local people, or did you actually fly all your crew out? And if you did hire local people, how did you research them? What was some of the criteria that you asked them to submit to make those important decisions?
So there's two different elements. There's different levels of trust needed depending on the position. So if it's a driver, I need to be able to trust them to drive safely, not be inappropriate with the actors they're driving around, versus if it's a DP, there's a lot more I'm entrusting them with as it pertains to the project. So it depends a lot on those variables as well. We usually try to bring in key people that we know for the positions that are most critical to us. And then we try to find people that we know locally. So in this case, Eric Ludy is a good friend of ours. He was in the area. So we reached out to him for a lot of people that we needed to fill positions that he might know. And so we worked from that angle. And then there were some positions we just straight up were looking through the directories of film crew available in the area because we needed to fill those positions. We didn't want to bring them in from out of town because it's more expensive. And all we needed was to find the people we could trust to be a good lighting technician or to be a good grip. And so at that point, you're doing straight up interviews. You're talking with them. You're trying to get a feel. It's also a question of availability, and you just try to hire the best option that you can. And every once in a while, it won't work out. I was working on one project, not the one that we just saw, but I was working on a different project. We hired someone. It seemed like it was going to work out great. They had all the right credentials, all the right experience list, but guess what? They were available when a lot of people weren't, and that should have told me something. So we ended up having to let them go just after a few days. So you don't always get it right. You try to do the best you can, but then I would say if there's something that's not working, try to change it quickly as well. So.
Let's talk about music from each of your your jobs. How early and what are the touch points with music?
Music, well, the first touch point with music is way on establishing what your budget is for it. So if you have the ability to go with a full orchestra, you know, it's going to be tens and tens of thousands of dollars. And then licensed songs, you know, are you going to get some pop songs or something to put in there? So that's the first thing that you discuss. What does this movie need at the producer level early on as you're looking to establish your budget? Once you have that kind of locked in place, it's more of the director's relationship with your particular composer. And it's fun to bring your composer on as soon as you can so that they're reading the script early on. I've had that happen on 2 or 3 projects. Most of the time, you're flying so fast with production and prep that you're unable to put too much energy into the music earlier. But as you start to get into production, if you can select your composer, I've had times where I've been able to invite the composer out to set, and they come and they can sit and watch what we're up to, and they can chat with the actors and, you know, look at those things and start noodling on themes and shooting them over to you, so that as soon as you wrap, you're already started in those conversations. That's my favorite way. I think that's probably the right way to do it, is have them, you know, reading the script early and being able to get a taste of what you're doing in production. But sadly, a lot of times that's just impossible, and you wind up, you know, halfway through your cut before you actually lock in your composer. And then at that point, it's more of you have to deal with the temp music that your editor stuck in there, and kind of clean that out of your mind and clean that out of their mind and start that process over. But yeah, it's really from the producer's side of it, it's setting up for success, establishing the vision and the scope of what you need the music to do for you, budget-wise at the beginning, and then they kind of hand that to the director afterwards.
Every once in a while, there'll be a project where the music is intrinsic to the story, and so that might change, you know, where that point needs to get involved as well. One of the first projects I worked on, there was a song that was part of the story, and so obviously they got the composer involved before we even started filming, because they wanted to be able to play that song on set for the actors. So it can depend on the project you're doing as well. And like you said, from a budget perspective, you have to see how much budget you have. So depending on the scale of your budget, you may need to look at it and say, well, for it to be a balanced budget so that we're getting the maximum value for the project, this is how much I can afford to spend in this area, and that might dictate even when you get the composer involved.
Is there a difference between the creative works and focus between the director and the producer in a project?
Yes.
Let me take a quick stab on that. So having done both, the producer, I want to stand out for my producers, because before I directed, you know, people would look at it and say, well, you're a producer. Well, you know, you don't, that's great. You don't really understand creativity. You're like, no, that's not true. I understood it the whole way through. It's a different kind of creativity, though. You have a more month-by-month, day-by-day role, whereas the producer has or the director has like a minute-by-minute role. So in the producer role, most decisions, you can think about it for at least an hour before you have to pull the trigger on it, for most of the big decisions you make across. The director, by the time you get onto set, you're making decisions in, you know, little tiny bites and seconds. And yes, the director is ultimately responsible for all the creative things, but a good producer is right there supporting them with that the whole time. So it's very, very close. And even then, flipping it the other way, the logistics side, directing is a very logistics-intensive role, because if you say, well, hey, I want to film over here, and I want to film over here, I want to put my camera here, put my camera there, you can very quickly, if you don't have a great logistics grasp on those, you can ruin your whole project because you blew your whole shooting day. And so you really, both of them are significantly overlapped, I think, more than either role will sometimes give each other credit for.
And just a little note to add on to that, as we were working, something that Aaron told me as he started directing, he's like, as producers, we'll go and ask the director something because we need their input on it. But when you go ask the director something at lunch, when they have their head completely, you know, immersed in all the details of filming, and you want to get their feedback on 5 or 6 questions that you've been thinking about all morning, it's really, really hard for the director to be able to, you know, even process that or come up with a solution. And that's something that I really appreciated the insight as he was giving it to me. He's like, okay, you know what? I probably should wait at least till the end of day so that they can kind of release, you know, if at all possible. So try to protect the director in that way and figure out the best times that you can try to get the answers to those questions.
Yeah, I remember when I was working with Alex Kendrick, producing for him, it's like, oh, good, he's at lunch, perfect. And you come over and you say, all right, so Alex, next Thursday. The eyes are just like, it's like, and you're like, it's simple. You know, we talked about this on our text scout. Next Thursday, how many extras do you need? Is 12 going to be enough? And it's just, he's like, give me a minute. I'm like, how hard is that to decide? But he's literally, what's happening in his mind right then is he's saying, okay, I need one more shot for that scene, but I don't have. So he's cutting and cutting and recutting the scene that he just shot, trying to decide if after lunch they need to grab one more shot or not. And it's like, you know how far away next Thursday is? Like, yeah, it's 18 hours. We got to know now. He's like, no, it's tomorrow. I can't possibly think about it today. So it was interesting. And I would always laugh at, you know, not laugh, but like, well, hey, you know, this director just, but then when you're the one in the chair, you're like, there's not a gear I can shift into to answer this question right now. I got nothing. All right.
Well, first I want to say thank you for being who you guys are and all that, because I've just noticed in this whole session we've talked about people and we've talked a lot about taking care of your crew and all that. But there aren't a lot of producers who do that. There's a lot of producers who just see numbers and budget and they just see just the schedule and all that. So I was just wondering, what are some tricks and traits you guys use in your own lives to help refocus that mindset of it's about the crew and the people and the locations at the end of the day rather than the budget?
So I grew up making no budget films where everybody was a volunteer. And if your volunteers aren't enjoying being there, they're going to leave. Sorry, see ya. And as we started to transition to be able to pay people, if you keep that in mind, that you want treat these people and value their time and value them as a person just like you would a volunteer. And you think of, I don't know if you guys are involved in any kind of church ministry things, but a film crew is very similar to a congregation. They're just a bunch of sheeple who want direction, who are there to help. They're happy to show up, but they need love. They need to be led well. They need all of those things. And if you think of them as a cog in the wheel, it's like, well, you are the $325 a day, you know, assistant to, you know, whatever. It's like, that's your rate. That's what you do. I'm paying you to be here, so shut up and do your job. That's not going to work well. But if there's someone who usually makes $500 and you come to them and you say, hey, I value you. I know your time is worth more than this. I know that you have many other opportunities. This is my vision for the project. I would love you to come and collaborate with us. You'll find that people welcome that and they love it. And then more than just the dollars they're making, why do you think everybody's in the film industry? Because they grew up as little boys and girls who wanted to make movies. And that's why we're here. We're here to tell stories, to be a part of something bigger than yourself, and to see that up on the screen. Nobody signed up because they're like, you know what I'd love? I love wrapping cable. That's why I'm here. I love, you know, washing actors' laundry. You know, I love punching holes in call sheets, right? It's no, people came here because they wanted to be a part of a story. So as you treat them as people, see the little boy or the little girl inside of them who has dreams just like you do, and pull all those people together then and lead them towards the goal, people are going to have a blast, and they're going to have absolutely a lot of fun. And they'll work hard, too. It never works to, there's the Bible verse where the guy says, my father beat you with whips, I'm going to beat you with scorpions. It doesn't work on your film set. Beating people with scorpions does not work. But call to them, inspire them, encourage them, and embrace them as the little boys and girls with dreams and visions, just like you are, and it'll go a long way.
And just to add to that, like from a budget perspective, it will cost you. You're going to look back and it's like, wow, that cost money to treat people better, whether it's whatever it is, anything. But the balance to that is, like he was saying, you get value out of it as well. Your crew's going to be happier. They're going to be working better. You might be more efficient. And what seems like a, you know, cost or a loss might balance out somewhere else. So that's one thought as you're looking at that. Ultimately, you want to be able to go up the mountain, friends, and come back down, friends, and do another project together as well. So it really comes down to that priority of saying, I value more the people than the project. And you have to somehow find the balance because, again, we've talked about all those different parties that are involved, right? You've got the funding, you've got the viewer, you've got the crew, and you've got the location where you're filming, the local people that you're working with. So you have to find the balance for all of that because you can't say, well, I'm going to be extra nice to one group and cheat the other group in the process. So that's why you're keeping all those people in mind. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to sleep at night and say, yes, I feel like we treated people in a way that's honoring to God and that they would want to work again. And you're on a team. You know, I mean, it's funny. Each time I put a budget together, I always put these great rates in for everybody. And most of the time, those rates get trimmed after a while because I have to make sure that I can pay everybody what I actually promised to pay them. And so my goal is always to be as balanced as possible in all the different areas of the budget with all the different groups of people that we're, you know, kind of responding to or responsible for. So the more balanced you can be with all of those different pieces, the more understanding everybody's going to be as well when you have to cut back somewhere or work around something.
At the same time, a lot of taking care of people is actually free. Like saying thank you and smiling and valuing people and appreciating them and those kind of things. And even vision casting, like we'll always, at the beginning of our project, this isn't free, I guess, but Dave was like, no, there's a $2,000 line item in there for your welcome lunch. But we'll do a welcome dinner for the crew, and we'll introduce everybody. We'll tell them what we're up to. We'll talk to them about the project and do all those kind of things. And that investment, I had Lucas Black, who's the lead actor in our last film. I sent out a welcome letter, which I do on every project, and I say, I introduce myself, I introduce what our goals are, what we're trying to accomplish, what the film's about, and just, you know, basic details and how to look out for yourself and in the environment we're shooting, the location of the town, whatever it is. And he responded back to me and he said, I've been doing movies since I was 12 years old. I've never gotten a welcome letter before that cast the vision for a project. And I'm like, bro, that's free. It's like an email. And it's just something that I think just because of our volunteer and church ministry background, like that's second nature to us to do those kind of things. But for him, he was like, this meant so much to me. Now I get it. I'm here. And he was able to buy in a much bigger way and start leading the crew. I remember it was 4 a.m. on a horrible night when everybody was exhausted. And, you know, the snow's coming down and the fog machine's down and all this stuff. And I'm ready to quit. And he says, no, guys, everybody be quiet. Listen, we need to get this done. This is important. Let's go. And here's the actor who's cheering the team on and was able to come along and support me because we set him up for success at the beginning. So there's definitely some things that cost money, but there's other things you can do to invest and love people that are just free. It just takes a little bit of time.
This session, but they'll be here all week. So feel free to chat them up in the hallway and things like that. What I'd ask you to do, yeah, give these guys a quick hand.